Hello everybody, welcome back again to the Reggae Appreciation Society. By 1974, Winston Rodney, the frontman and founder of the legendary Burning Spear group, was laying the foundations for his eventual emergence as one of the godfathers and ambassadors of roots reggae, just a year after leaving the roster of Coxsone Dodd's record label. In those early days, one of his closest friends and most solid allies was none other than Leroy Horsemouth Wallace, one of Jamaica's greatest drummers and longtime in-house band member at Studio One. The two became close when Burning Spear was first taken on by Coxsone Dodd in 1969, and Horsemouth became his drummer. Even after Winston Rodney and his bandmates parted ways with Studio One, the pair remained close friends and professional collaborators, with Horsemouth acting as one of the driving forces of Winston Rodney's sound. But in a bizarre sudden twist that no one saw coming, they had a sensational falling out that sparked a shocking brawl that culminated in the two bosom pals and partners cutting ties, both musically and on a personal level. It was a row that stunned witnesses and ended one of the true few friendships in the treacherous world of the music business. Though heavily underreported, it's one of the longest running feuds in reggae and the music industry at large. Let's take a look at the shocking clash that ended the model friendship of Winston Rodney and Leroy Horsemouth. To do justice to this story, we need to take a little dive into how their friendship started in the first place at the University of Reggae, that was Studio One. By 1969, Studio One was the numero uno music institution in Jamaica. It was essentially the cradle of ska, reggae and dancehall, and had been the first black-owned recording studio on the island when established by Coxsone Dodd in 1963. It was Jamaica's own Motown and had nurtured the island's biggest stars like Toots and the Maytals, Dennis Brown and the Wailers. It boasted of several elite in-house studio bands such as the Soul Vendors and the Scatterlights, which had in its ranks former students of the popular Alpha Boy School in Kingston, renowned for its awesome musical program, which has turned out many notable musicians over the years. Leroy Horsemouth Wallace was one of the products of the Alpha Boy School, and at just 19, he was already a veteran and had contributed to many big hits that came out of Studio One. Around that time, Winston Rodney, who was then living up in the country at St. Anne Parish, was looking for a way to break into the music business and would get priceless advice from a fellow future legend that he fortuitously bumped into while taking a walk in the hills one day. On that fateful day in 1969, Bob Marley, who was also born and was at the time living in St. Anne, was walking to the farm that morning and bumped into Rodney, so both young lads stopped for a quick chat. Bob had already blown up years before with the Wailers, so Rodney sought his advice and told him that he was interested in going into music. Bob told him immediately to check out Studio One. The Wailers had broken away from Studio One 3 years earlier, but all credit to Bob for recommending the studio, as he knew it was the best place for new artists to start a career. Rodney took Bob's advice and traveled to Kingston with his singing partner to audition for Coxsone Dodd. After singing 3 of their songs, they were taken on at the studio and released their first single, Door Peep Shall Not Enter, that was backed by the studio's in-house band, the Soul Vendors. Horsemouth was the drummer of that band and struck up a tight friendship with Rodney, and the two became very close. As was the usual case with Studio One artists, things were very tight for Rodney financially, and Horsemouth would show support to his friend, often traveling to St. Anne, where Rodney still lived, to bring his friend food and supplies. By 1972, Burning Spear had started to get some hits, including the smash single Joe Frazier, and Burning Spear would release their debut album titled Studio One Presents Burning Spear in 1973, and was followed by the album Rocking Time in 1974. Burning Spear soon after left Studio One due to creative differences and went on to work with producer Lawrence Lindo, aka Jack Ruby. They went to work on their next album, Marcus Garvey, which came out on the 12th of December 1975. The album featured Rodney's classic chanting singing style, Jack Ruby's production expertise, and the spectacular instrumentals from a super elite backing band called the Black Disciples that was made up of the likes of Robbie Shakespeare on the bass, Earl China Smith on lead guitar, and the mercurial Leroy Horsemouth Wallace on the drums. The end product was the Marcus Garvey album, a militant roots masterpiece that is regarded as one of the greatest reggae albums of all time. The startling success of this album caught the attention of Island Records, and they signed Burning Spear on a record deal not long after. Burning Spear began to enjoy phenomenal success on a local and international level, and released equally classic follow-up albums like Garvey's Ghost, Man in the Hills, Dry and Heavy, and Social Living, all powered by his backing band that featured the thunderous, brilliant drum rolls of Horsemouth. In 1978, Horsemouth had been cast in the starring role in the now classic Jamaican movie Rockers. Horsemouth used his influence with the director, Ted Bafalocus, to give Winston Rodney a part in the movie, and together, the two friends delivered what was one of the most riveting scenes in the movie. In the iconic scene, Burning Spear sang the song "Jah No Dead" in a sorrowful a cappella to encourage Horsemouth's distraught character as they shared their spliffs, sitting on the ruins of a prison by the seaside. That year seemed to be the peak of their friendship, but unfortunately, it would soon hit the rocks in a terrible way. By 1979, Burning Spear had been touring the globe non-stop with the Black Disciples. Sometime that year, they were on tour of the US with the Mighty Diamonds, and a few days before their concert, their management rented a hall for them to rehearse. As the story goes, after the Mighty Diamonds finished their rehearsals, it was time for Burning Spear and his band, and that is where the problem would begin. The band were in fine form and majestically blazed through the first 3 songs instrumentals, but Rodney was prowling the stage and wouldn't sing. Seasoned Burning Spear fans are aware that Winston Rodney's performances always feature a spiritual element. When performing, he normally gets in the zone and slips into a trance-like state, swaying to the instrumentals before launching into his vocals. But for some reason that day, he seemed to rub Horsemouth up the wrong way. Horsemouth stopped playing his drums, stood up and told Rodney off for keeping the band hanging, accusing his old friend of allowing success to get to his head. This infuriated Rodney, who took out his anger on Horsemouth's new pair of boots that were lying on the stage. Rodney would pick up one of Horsemouth's boots and ripped it wide open. Horsemouth, now really enraged, charged at Rodney and punched him in the face. Both men had to be restrained before it got any worse, and on the spot, they both vowed never to work with each other again. The incident sparked a crisis as Burning Spear tried to get a new drummer to replace Horsemouth, but they couldn't get anybody anywhere near up to his standard. Robbie Shakespeare, who was very close to Horsemouth, pleaded with him to do the show. Horsemouth agreed to play just one more show, but made it clear to Robbie that was the end of his working relationship with Rodney. He returned to the Black Disciples for that concert and delivered a scorching performance. After that night, he returned to his arrangement with Coxsone Dodd at Studio One, never again to work with Burning Spear, who for subsequent albums and tours employed the services of ace drummer Nelson Miller. A sad end to a wonderful friendship that was damaged by a lack of understanding and egos. These accounts all came from an interview that Horsemouth gave over a year ago, and from the look of things, the relationship between both men still appears to be very frosty. And we haven't heard Burning Spear's own side of the story for a balanced view, so for now, all we can do is speculate. The bad blood that kicked off that night in 1979 could have been just another case of what happens when a person becomes really successful and lets it get to his head, in the process alienating and possibly provoking those closest to them, something that's very common in the world of music and business. But on the flip side, it could just have been a misunderstanding that got out of hand in the heat of the moment due to youthful exuberance. And when you consider the fact that they were still young men at the time, it is very possible. Either way, I think it's a sad thing that 2 icons and legends of reggae music are still beefing into their 70s. We can only hope that sometime soon, the 2 former best friends can reset what was a model example of brotherhood. Maybe Burning Spear sending Horsemouth a brand new pair of red, gold and green boots may just be a good place to start. So there you have it. Thank you for watching the video today. Please leave a like, subscribe, and until next time, Jah bless.